Alrighty guys, so we're going to jump back into it and just cover a bunch of things that have been happening over the past few days. I've been busy doing other stuff and so I want to stay up to date on everything that is going on, but I haven't been able to cover everything in quite as much detail as I've been doing in my past videos. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get into it. First, we're going to start with Erika's sit down. So I have not, for whatever reason, been wanting to watch this, but I may go back and watch it just to see what she said in that interview, just so I have that context. And I did watch a YouTube video where someone was talking about their opinions and their thoughts about the interview, and mainly the reason why I didn't want to watch it is because I started watching maybe like the first 2 or 3 minutes and it seemed like it was repeating stuff that we already knew, and I've been complaining about that with the Nick interviews and stuff that I've been watching, how they keep going over the same stuff, and so I didn't really want to spend my time watching an interview if I didn't feel like I was going to learn anything new. And so anyway, I came across a video that someone did reacting to the interview, and basically they were talking about how they were annoyed by her constantly wiping her eyes, and I found that really interesting because I grew up in the early 2000s and there was a TV show The Hills, and Lauren Conrad, there's a scene where she's crying and her mascara is running, and I don't know if we didn't have waterproof mascara or she just wasn't using it then. And so anyway, she cried and you can see like the mascara running down her eyes, and so that's what they say a trick is for people to show that they're crying, that they'll use non-waterproof mascara, they'll start crying, and then the mascara running makes it more dramatic. And so that's what she should have went for if she really wanted to show her like, hey, you know, I'm crying, blah blah blah. And I point that out because on Real Housewives Beverly Hills, that happened to Erika Girardi, where she was crying and then the mascara was running down and people were saying, oh, you know, she intentionally did that because she knew it would happen, right? And so there's different ways that you can handle the fake tears scenario, and so I just found it interesting that people are still annoyed by the fact that she's constantly wiping her eyes and all of that stuff. Then the reviewer also talked about how she felt like she was constantly plugging TPUSA, and that was interesting because since Charlie Kirk has died, they have constantly been doing the Charlie Kirk show, having the Turning Point USA event, so it makes sense that she would constantly plug TPUSA because they want to keep that going, they want to keep his memory going, and they're associating the two, if that makes sense. And so I'm not really surprised or concerned by that, but I was surprised by people not knowing that they were selling merch at the memorial, because I was constantly watching Twitter and scrolling through it to see what people were saying, and I saw at one point people were talking about Benny Johnson, and then they were talking about how they had this big cross on wheels and all of that stuff. And it's interesting that 5 to 7 weeks later people don't know everything that happened at the memorial, so that was kind of more shocking to me than anything else that she said in that review of Erika's interview. And also by now everybody has something negative to say about Erika Kirk, and I think what hits me about her, or what rubs you the wrong way, is one, her eyes. Her eyes obviously look different because of before and after, because I had a impression of her and thought of her one way when I just saw pictures of her. Then I started to see the kind of behind the scenes clips of her and Charlie before he died, and then that gave me a little bit of a different energy about her, and then now obviously after going through trauma she's going to be different, right? And so what sticks out to me is her eyes. There's just something about them that kind of, not necessarily, there's just something about me that has me second guessing things. And the other thing I want to say is that from her vibes in this CNN interview, just from like the little clips that I've seen of it, we know that she has long hair, she does the dark eyeliner and all of that stuff, but for whatever reason she gives me 90s vibe, like that's what's the look that she's going for, and that also seems kind of like outdated. Like you don't, like, it's like when you have a woman who is like 50 but she's still wearing a hairstyle from the 70s and it feels out of place. And so I feel like that may be why Erika feels like she's out of place, because it just doesn't vibe with how people do things currently, if that makes sense. And what I want to point to is, because I wanted to mention this in one of my other videos, if you're not familiar with the movie A Walk to Remember, Mandy Moore is in that movie, and basically she is treated like an outcast because she's really religious, she dresses differently, all of that stuff. The kids make fun of her, and so it's kind of like that energy with Erika Kirk, where she doesn't really fit in and it stands out as weird because of that's not the norm. And so I think that also ties into the 90s energy that I was getting from her, and I think that in addition to what feels performative, it just feels like bad 90s acting in my opinion. Alrighty, moving on. I want to cover a few things that Candace said in her show. So she did a show Friday night, and I was not expecting it. I got the notification saying that Candace was going live, and I was like, wait, what? On a Friday at this time? Because I think it was like 7 p.m. or something like that. And then when I joined, there was like 29K people already watching the stream. So I don't know if it had been going for like a minute or two or something like that, but that many people quickly jumped on to hear what Candace had to say. So that was pretty cool. Now, first, I want to go back to her Thursday show because there was something that I disagreed with that she said, and it was when she was talking about cover-up. So I'm just going to go ahead and play the clip of her talking about that, and then we can go over it.
We say certain things and then change our stories multiple times. Pretend like it's just beyond the pale that Candace would suggest that we're engaging in a cover-up. Yes, I did say that. I didn't say that Mikey murdered Charlie Kirk. I said Turning Point is engaged in a cover-up because that is literally the only reason that people lie. Anytime you lie, it's because you're covering up the truth.
Okay, so I want to pause it here. So what she's explaining is why she thinks people are lying, they're covering up something, and then she's going to continue and explain like her definition of a cover-up. And so what I want to highlight here is that I don't think there's anything wrong with calling people out. If you clearly know that they're lying, you should have a right to do that. But then it gets kind of messy when you're trying to determine what those lies lead to.
You're engaging in a cover-up. Even if it's a white lie, even if I say, I'm trying to surprise a friend for a birthday party and I tell her, I'm the only one that's going to be there, meet me here, it's a lie because I'm covering up a certain truth, right?
Okay, I want to pause it here because this is where I started to disagree with her, because there's a difference between telling a white lie with a good intention and then just lying, period. And so I think that ties into a cover-up, because when you tell a white lie, you have good intentions and you're not really trying to hurt anybody or deceive anybody. You're just trying to protect their feelings, right? When you lie, it's for a bad reason. It's for a nefarious reason. You are trying to get over on somebody, and that's something different. Both situations involve some form of lying, but the intention is completely different. And so what she's saying here is that she's trying to connect the two, white lie and cover up, and I don't think that you can do that, because cover up, that is nefarious, that has bad intention. You're trying to hide something and you're trying to keep something from being exposed because it makes you look bad or it makes somebody else look bad. When you tell a white lie, with the example that she gave of surprising someone, you're trying to do something nice for that person. You're trying to help them, right? And there's obviously other situations where you can tell white lies, but I want to focus on the example that she gave. And so I don't necessarily agree that if you tell any type of lie, whether it's a big lie or a small lie, but that means you're covering up something. Because when you say a cover up, to me, I think of like political cover ups or businesses covering up something. I don't think of something that is innocent, if that makes sense.
That is what lies are for. There is no other reason to lie unless you're covering something up. So when you lied about the Catholicism thing, it wasn't because you murdered Charlie Kirk, Alex. It was because likely you guys were more concerned with your Christian Zionist donors and also pressure from your Jewish donors.
Okay, so that's the end of a clip, and basically she's just calling them out and saying, like, this is why you lied, because you wanted to appease some other people instead of just letting the truth be out there and the chips fall where they may. Okay, getting back to her Friday episode, so she basically had 2 or 3 savage burns, and they were in the vein of life's tough, get a helmet, man. She was just fed up. She was not here to play games, and so I really love the moment when she called out Ben Shapiro because he went on Megyn Kelly's show or her conference, whatever she was doing. He's basically like, hey, Candace Owens, she said these awful things about Erika Kirk, disavow her, do it right now. Basically, Candace played this clip, and she's talking about what Ben is doing. And so she's just saying like, hey, this is a pressure campaign. They're trying to morally blackmail you, right? And make you agree or side with them because you're kind of in this awkward situation where you might not know everything, but because what they're saying is so awful, you would obviously want to condemn it if that's actually what happened. So anyway, she goes through all of that, and she then invites Ben Shapiro to come on her show, and we can just go ahead and play the clip on that.
Make you feel uncomfortable because it's a part of that moral blackmail pileup. And so I'm actually genuinely not upset. I don't care. I believe in the free markets. I genuinely will say again, I will always debate Ben Shapiro. If Tucker left you on red and you want to come on this show and you want to debate Israel and you want to discuss Erika Kirk and the things I never said, if you want to discuss your relationship with Charlie Kirk, anything that I have said that you would like to dispute, my platform is your platform. I'd say you should come on my platform because my show's bigger now. But we could also do yours. So hit me up. We'll be right back after a brief break.
That was so funny because one, she brought up Tucker leaving him on red, and I was paying attention during this part of Candace's show, but I missed it. And so basically what happened is Ben's telling the story of how he reached out to Tucker, and then I guess at some point Tucker didn't respond. And from what Candace was saying, because Ben talks so fast and sometimes it's hard for me to understand what he's saying, and so what Candace was saying was that basically they were policing who Tucker had on his show, and I guess that led to Tucker leaving Ben on red. And so she makes a reference to that when she says, if you're upset that Tucker left you on red, and then she's like, oh, you should come on my show because my platform is bigger now. And that ties into her podcast being number one, but also her having been let go from the Daily Wire. And it's so interesting when you talk about the Daily Wire because I really had no interest in the Daily Wire before Candace joined it. I was only part of that subscription service, whatever, because of Candace, because I wanted to hear what she had to say, and a few of her content was behind the paywall. And it also got annoying to a point because there were some episodes where she would block things out so it wouldn't get taken down from YouTube, and then she would say, go behind the paywall to see what was censored or the rest of this episode. And that got super annoying because I just wanted to watch everything on YouTube, right? And then the other thing that she pointed out, this was later on, and I'm only bringing this up now because we're talking about her connection to Shapiro and the Daily Wire. Later on, I believe she mentioned in a interview that she did with Dave Smith that I'll talk about briefly later on, and basically what she said was that she brought Dave Smith on her old show, and then she also said that her old channel is down. So on YouTube it's down and it's channel no name or something like that, but all of those episodes are actually still up on Rumble for whatever reason, and that's so interesting because I got annoyed because I wanted to go back and I wanted to see something from one of her episodes and I couldn't find it, and then I found it on Rumble. And so that's very interesting. If that channel on Rumble is still up and you want to go and watch all of Candace's old content from the Daily Wire, you can find that channel. Okay, so now this really is kind of I don't even know if this is the tip of the iceberg in terms of her feud with Ben Shapiro, but then she goes on to talk about a text exchange between her and Charlie Kirk, and the general vibe here is that basically her and Charlie Kirk were aware that Ben Shapiro was not an ally or friendly with them. He was just kind of a means to an end. He was to help them get more exposure is how I would word it based on what they're saying here, because they understood that he was one trying to control Candace through Charlie Kirk, but then also that he then later hired Candace Owens, and then he really kind of, I guess in a sense, seemed to have policed what she was able to say, and that kind of came to a head with her being let go over the comments that she was making about Israel. So the text exchange with Charlie Kirk was super interesting because I have it up on the screen. It's worse, he views you as my slave, 100% control her, is what he's really saying to me when he called. And so that's just so interesting to see them having these deeper conversations about what's going on behind the scenes, because I would have never thought that something like this was happening. And I actually went back to watch old videos because I wanted to see what the dynamic was between her and Charlie Kirk, because I started watching Candace after all of that when she joined the Daily Wire, so I really missed anything before. And so obviously you can see their dynamic, and there is one interview where they sit down with Ben Shapiro, and I don't know if this text exchange is around that time, if it was before or after. And so that's interesting when you think about the dynamic between the three of them, and it was more of Charlie Kirk and Candace realizing that Ben Shapiro wasn't an ally. Okay, moving on, I want to move into the white nationalist clip that Candace played, and I found this super interesting because she's sitting down for an interview on CNN with Elle Reeves. I'm not sure who Elle Reeves is, but I did see her on, I guess, CNN, and it's the show that Scott Jennings does, and I just saw her briefly. I don't know who she is, but I noticed her, and then here she is interviewing Candace. So I don't really know her background. I did look her up on Wikipedia, and she does seem to be like an accomplished journalist and all of that stuff, and so that's good for her. And in this interview, what I find interesting is because she does look mixed race or biracial, and basically, in my opinion, from that lens, these are two Black women sitting down to talk about white nationalism, and it's just super interesting how that conversation plays out, and so we can just watch a clip on that.
You can criticize Netanyahu without being anti-Israel, and you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. But some of the themes, talking points, concepts you've used in your criticism of Israel, I'm very familiar with from covering white nationalists for 10 years. It's very unsettling for me to hear things like you saying our government is occupied by Zionists, Trump is occupied by Zionists, we're an occupied nation.
Okay, I want to pause it here. So what stuck out to me from the CNN with Scott Jennings is her talking style. And so she does kind of close her eyes a lot. She doesn't make eye contact, that sort of thing. And so it is unsettling because it feels like they sent a lamb to interview Candace Owens. And not that Candace kind of took advantage of her or anything like that, but Candace, she had, it seems like in this moment and the other clip I'm going to play, it seemed like she didn't really know how to handle Candace. So I can't imagine her from that lens interviewing white nationalists who have very strong opinions, because is she interviewing them with the intention of making them see the error of their ways? Is she platforming them? What is she doing? So I was curious, and I did want to check out some of her work in terms of white nationalists and the interviews that she's done with them. But that just caught my eye because it just doesn't feel like she's, from her energy and the way she's talking, it doesn't really feel like she's going to be able to convince Candace of anything or hold Candace accountable for what she's saying.
Because like there's literally a term that's like an 80s, 90s term from white nationalism, ZOG, Zionist occupied government. It's their idea that Jews control the world. And I'm wondering, like, are you intentionally referencing those kind of themes?
Wait, just to slow this down. Are you accusing me of white nationalist rhetoric? Because I do have to have a little bit of a giggle about that first.
Well, that's...
I want to pause it here because the girl, I think she's kind of smiling and she's kind of like, yeah, that's what I was getting at. And so it's kind of like you're the butt of the joke in this moment, because I think that you can't really, if someone has an opinion about something and another group thought that, you can't be like, oh, well, you can't ever think that again or ever say that again because this group said that. I don't think you can prevent people from having ideas or saying certain words just because one group thought that way or promoted that idea or said that word. And what I want to point to is that at the beginning of the clip, she said, you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic, but when you do that, the problem is you're using white nationalist rhetoric. And so it feels like, yes, you can criticize Israel, but then whatever reason you give, that is going to be what they criticize instead of what you actually said about whatever your opinion was on what Jews are doing and whatever, right? Or what the Israeli government, rather, is doing. And so I just find that interesting because it seems like you're in a can't-win situation. It's just two ways of criticizing you for the same thing, ultimately for the same issue.
I mean, to me, I'm also like, they'd be no fan of yours.
It's silly. But this is one of the things where I feel like it's such a lesson for CNN. This is why nobody watches it anymore. I mean, it's like you're sitting across from a Black person, you're like, I've learned about white nationalism, and you're using white nationalism. Right?
Like, I know them, I've been to their rallies, I've read all their texts.
I get it, I know. I'm so glad you're educated. But this is when it's like, put it in a book and anybody will say it. It's like, it's just, at a certain point you have to use your eyes and go, is Candace Owens promoting white nationalist rhetoric? Okay. Immediately no. So what else could it be? Could it be that actually Zionism is what it actually represents?
What does that mean? Like,
it's
Zionism.
Okay, I want to pause it here because this is the point that I was getting at, because basically you present an idea, they shut it down and say, nope, you can't think that because of X, Y, and Z reason, and they don't explore the possibility that what you're saying is actually true. It doesn't matter who said it before, the truth is the truth. I think that Candace is right to push back here because the truth is the truth regardless of who said it. And Now, in terms of whether or not it's true, if you want to investigate that, then yeah. But if you've done your work and you know that to be true, you should be able to say that. It doesn't really matter if other people don't know that yet, and that's why they're pushing back. That's a really weird way to say that, but there's 2 documentaries that I'm going to talk about a little bit later that kind of make me say what I just said. So I'm going to leave it there and let this clip finish out.
On political philosophy. Okay?
Zionist-occupied government.
If you look into the history, yes, I believe we are a Zionist-occupied government, and we're not the only one, okay? Yes, and I take it to the bank. If you need to walk out of here and say Candace Owens is a white nationalist for you to be able to digest it, then that's fine. You know, you have to deal with that in your own time. But what I will say is I stand by every statement that I made, and I want to double down on it.
I want to pause it here. There's just like 4 seconds left of this clip, but right here, that face she's making, she's reminding me of Gabrielle Union. Like her and Gabrielle Union, sometimes when they're talking, they make those same facial expressions, and I just find it funny. Okay, so that's the end of the clip, and so basically, I'm very interested in seeing the rest of this interview and how it goes, and if it's like this the whole time. So I just want to see what that interview is like. Okay, moving on, they also talked about the they comment, and this was super funny to me because I say, like, oh, you know, they're saying blah, 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 or they said this happened and blah, 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 and what I'm speaking to when I say they is, like, the general public or, like, people that I know who have said that is not referencing any specific person, and the reason why I'm bringing that up is because they were pointing to the video of that selfie that the guy was doing when he was saying Charlie Kirk was dead, and he was up on the hill and all of that stuff, and they're like, who was they? He should be saying he. Well, at that time, he didn't know it was he, right? So you're going to say they because you don't know who the shooter is. You don't know if the shooter is male or female, and then you don't know if it's more than one person. So they is generally what you say when you're referencing something out there and you don't know what it is, right? So I hope that makes sense, and so I feel like for whatever reason, they, in this clip that we're about to play, and then also going back to that selfie video, everyone's talking about what they mean. I think people have just lost sense of what it means because of the whole non-binary thing, and they just forgot how to use grammar and all of that stuff, and how people use the word they in like a social context.
They is a word, so like I don't need to always like say they. Like it's just a weird. It's like this is one of these psychology tactics where you're like, who is they? Who is they? And it's like,
because it sounds like you're saying Jews.
Does the word they mean Jews?
When you're talking about Jews, yes.
But if I'm not talking about Jews, then they doesn't mean Jews. When I say...
I want to pause it here because some context is missing, because I don't know what they were discussing just before this part of the clip started. So if they were talking about Jewish people and her saying they, you would think that they means Jewish people, right? But if they're talking about something else and then she's asking her about they, then that seems a little bit weird, and Candace is going to say that, but I just want to acknowledge that I don't know genuinely what they were talking about leading up to this moment.
They want us to believe this or they want us to believe that, and you hear Jews, that's your own derangement, right? If I want to say something about Jews, I'll say it. If I want to say something about Israel, I will say it. If I want to, just like when I want to say something about black people, I'll say it. When I was saying during BLM, they want us to believe, nobody said, do you mean Jews? And so again, it's one of these trash tactics to make people fearful to speak. If I want to say Jews, I will say Jews. I don't fear saying Jews. When I say Zionists run the media, I mean Zionists run the media. People that support the political ideology of Israel run the media. Any other things that I can help clarify?
Are you familiar with this like very long-standing trope?
Couldn't give a shit about a trope.
I really try not to curse.
I have to pause it because that was just so funny, because again, I just feel like this was probably not the best person to interview Candace just based on her mannerisms and all of that. She's not going to change Candace's mind anyway, and maybe nobody else would be able to, but I feel like she's not doing a very good job of it, right? And so now Candace is going to break down her thoughts on that part of the conversation.
But I just felt like we needed to kill it real quick, you know what I mean? Just get her to move on from it, because I really don't care. I'm so tired of these words. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. Are you exhausted? We're tired. Collectively, we're tired. I had to shut it down because I suddenly realized I was homeschooling my toddlers. And I told her, as the interview goes on, I was like, look, I have toddlers at home. I can't teach you, basic sentence. I'm teaching my toddlers how to read. And here I am, I'm teaching her how to understand they in a sentence. That's a place. what are we doing? How old is this person? And she says she's the same age as me. And I'm going, you missed first grade? You don't know what they means? And now you're just going to, it's a trope. This is the way to respond, okay? Just shut it down immediately. Embrace whatever you're going to be called. In this circumstance, if I got to be called a white supremacist to say my opinion about this administration and how it's been occupied by Zionists and the cruelties that the Palestinian children are suffering at the hands of Bibi Netanyahu, then so be it.
Okay, so what I want to respond to is she's bringing up the other girl's age, and she's actually older than Candace and I. Candace and I are a few months apart. This other person, Elle, she's actually in her 40s. Her date is unclear. It either says 81 or 82. And so as an older person, she should remember a world before all of this confusion with grammar, they, them, and all of that stuff. And so it's interesting to see two older people having this conversation, because you should definitely know how they is being used and all of that stuff and who it's referring to depending on the context clues of the conversation, right? It's really people who are probably younger than maybe 20 or something like that, who wouldn't really understand how they is used traditionally, if that makes sense. And so I just found that part of the conversation interesting, and I definitely want to see the full interview. Okay, moving on, I want to briefly discuss Dave Smith and Candace's interview. So I was not expecting this, and I saw a thumbnail, and I just assumed that it was Dave Smith talking about Candace Owens. I didn't realize that he was actually sitting down with her and doing an interview. And so I was watching this while I was crocheting, and so I wasn't really taking notes, and so I don't have much detail to talk about in terms of this interview. But they did just basically recap everything that was going on. They talked about her first interview with Dave. They talked about her standing up for Charlie Kirk, her having the #1 podcast in the world and what that means and all of that stuff. And so it really was a good interview to watch, to kind of tie everything together and just also get Dave Smith's perspective on everything that's happening. One thing that I did find interesting, because I don't know, it was in the Dave Smith and Nick Fuentes interview, and he brought up how he thought that Candace brought him on to her Daily Wire show to piss Ben Shapiro off. And I really wish that he would have brought that up, because did you really do that to piss Ben Shapiro off, or was it just that you generally wanted to have a conversation with him? And I think it's both things, but I was interested in him, and I would have liked it if he had asked her that to her face so that we could get that question answered. And I also don't know if that interview was filmed before or after her Friday episode, because in her Friday episode, in light of her conversation with Charlie Kirk about Ben Shapiro, that does paint that situation in a different light, to where you could see why she would be trying to piss off Ben Shapiro, because her and Charlie Kirk understand that he's not a friend of hers, if that makes sense. And so all of that is super interesting. Okay, moving on, I want to talk about another podcast. I've been watching a few episodes from Dad Save America, and that was super interesting because he did a recent episode on Mamdani and also Nick Fuentes. And so he was basically talking about their rise and basically what it means and how we got there and why it's alarming. And so I won't spend too much time on Mamdani because I really want to focus more on what he was saying about Nick Fuentes here. And so basically he's concerned about Nick Fuentes' rise and his influence on young boys, and he was also saying that he was having a conversation with his son to figure out how influential Nick Fuentes is, and literally he is everywhere. And so I'm going to play a clip on where towards the end he's kind of talking about why there's a problem with blaming the Jews for everything as a white man, as a young man in America.
One of the problems with Nick's collectivism, his racial shaming, his theory of global Jewry, is that I don't understand how it works. Like, what does that have to do with the opportunities that young men face? He doesn't connect the dots because they aren't really connectable. You, as an individual, as a young man in America today, can have a great life. There are barriers. There are costs. There are problems. You face more problems than I did when I was young. But if you embrace the belief that you are a victim of circumstance and that there are dark forces, and especially dark forces that are all aligned around a race, standing in your way, that is really just an excuse.
Okay, so that's the end of the clip, and it was super interesting for me because the person who does this podcast, his name is John, and so what this moment points to for me is it shows that he's not fully aware of Nick's story, because what he's questioning is, well, how are the Jewish people, how are they preventing you from having opportunities? And Nick Fuentes is literally the poster child for having his career derailed, ruined, because he asked questions on Israel. So that is why Nick can say, hey, you know, Jews are actually more loyal to being Jewish than they are to being American and all of that stuff, because he witnessed it firsthand from what he says, right? And so you can't say that they're not preventing you from having opportunities when that's literally what happened to Nick. That is the connection there. And so I found that super interesting because Nick is obviously angry and upset about how he was treated, and we can see how he has progressed since that's happened, and he has the point of view of where he's angry about how things are, he's upset about how things are, and people who are also upset about how things are, regardless of what is causing that, they are going to rally to Nick's platform, to his message, because they understand that frustration and that anger as well. And so for me, that is the connection there. That is why people are drawn to Nick Fuentes, in addition to him trolling, him being funny, and all of that stuff. Okay, so next up, John also talked about cancel culture, so I'm just going to play a clip on that.
Cancel culture is calling YouTube and saying to take down Nick or Tucker's site, calling their advertisers and saying you should stop advertising on Tucker. I think that is where you start to cross the line, trying to create these boycotts for speech. I think that is chilling in a way that's downright Maoist. But simply saying you're not part of the same movement we're a part of, whoever we are, that's fair game in this digital age.
So I definitely agree with what he said there. You do have the right to say, hey, you know, I don't want to associate with you. Your content is for me. I'm not going to watch. It is another thing when you say, I'm not going to watch and you shouldn't either, and I'm going to make sure that you can't watch, right? That is what we are seeing now. Even Nick was telling a story about how that girl, Cassie Dillon, she was calling his old boss to basically say, hey, did you hear what he said, and all of that stuff, trying to get his show taken off the air. That is cancel culture. And then you also have that recent conference or for the Republican Jewish, whatever it is called, and how they were basically saying, you know, Tucker is an anti-Semite, you shouldn't listen to him, blah, 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 cancel culture, all of that stuff. And so what he's describing is actually happening right now. There's people trying to cancel Candace, Nick, and Tucker. They're trying to tell you not to listen to their platform. They're telling you, I'm not listening to their platform. I don't agree with their message and you shouldn't either. That is cancel culture. That is not just saying, hey, their content is not for me, I'm not going to watch it, right? And then you also have people going a step further and saying, hey, you know, I don't like her content, her fans are crazy, they're delusional, blah, 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 because then you are basically trying to shame other people into not watching her content based off of what you originally think about it. And so I just find that super interesting. And then the other thing that John brought up was how Nick was different when he's on other people's platforms versus his own platform. And that's something that I've commented on as well and I've noticed as well. And I don't think that that's a bad thing, because when you think of Nick's show, he literally doesn't show very many videos. He doesn't have screenshots. He doesn't have any of that stuff. So what is it that's drawing people to his platform? It's literally his delivery, how he speaks, and what he has to say. And when you have someone who can draw an audience just on that alone, that tells you that what they are saying is very important and it resonates with a lot of people. And I think that that's the scary part, that you can have someone who is just likable and draws people to him based on what he says versus all of the extra stuff around it. And yes, I know that he trolls, and I think that he does that because he doesn't have the videos and the graphics and all of that stuff, right? He has to have something in addition to his message that keeps people watching. It's that entertainment comedian type of energy that he has that adds to his appeal. So yeah, I do think that on his show, Nick is a troll, he's a shock shock jock, but when he goes on other platforms, he's calmer and he's not that way because he doesn't have to be, right? His show, in a sense, is what gets him those other opportunities on other platforms to where he can then take his time to explain his message, because I could be wrong, but I don't feel like Nick would act crazy in people's faces unless they acted crazy first. I don't feel like he is this annoying person who goes out in the real world and he's a troll every single second of his life. I really think that that's just how he is on his show, but I could be wrong. Okay, lastly, I want to go into 2 documentaries that I watched. So I was crocheting over the weekend, and so I was watching a bunch of videos, and I wasn't fully taking notes, but I was trying to learn as much as I could, and I came across 2 documentaries in addition to other videos that I was watching. And the first one was explaining why Jews aren't the chosen people. That had 1 million views, and that video is a year old. And from the comment section, a lot of people were saying, hey, this is a good video, this is accurate, that sort of thing. And basically what they were talking about is like the issue with the current borders of Israel, how there's an issue with the temple, and not all Jewish people are in Israel. I think more Jewish people are in the United States and America than in Israel. So they were just talking about why the Jewish people aren't the chosen people. And then he was also talking about how Christianity is older than Judaism, which was super interesting because I've always heard it as it was Judaism, Christianity, and then Islam. Those are the 3 Abrahamic religions, and I've always grown up understanding that, and so I've never heard it said that Christianity is actually older than Judaism, which I find super interesting. And then he was also saying that Judaism is an entirely different religion from Hebrewism and then Christianity, if I have that understanding correct. And so it was just interesting to see him kind of lay out what the thought behind Jewish people not being the chosen people is. And I know that a lot of people are talking about Brandon Tatum and saying he's uneducated, and there's content like this out there that kind of explains it. And if you're interested in learning what the other side thinks and all of that stuff, it's super interesting. And so I don't know if I'm going to go back and watch that a second time. It's like an hour plus long video, but I thought that it was a really good video, and I feel like I learned more stuff. And then the second video that I watched was on Zionism, and this actually connected to what Nick was saying about Jewry. And basically what this video lays out is that around the time that people wanted to focus on having a national identity, like having one identity that transcends race, religion, and all of that stuff, there was a focus on that one identity, and Jewish people didn't fit in. And so that is what led to Jewish people being expelled from Europe or whatever. And then basically that was when they were like, hey, we need a Jewish state. And then I can't recall the reason why they selected it, but obviously it's because of where Israel was in the Bible. They went to Palestine, and then basically they took over Palestine, right? And so what I found super interesting is that back then there is this idea of the Jewish question: how do Jewish people fit into society? Can they assimilate into our national identity? And that's exactly what Nick was talking about in his interview with Tucker, where he was saying that he didn't think that certain influential Jewish people were able to assimilate into American culture. And there's this video talking about what was going on in like the 1800s, early 1900s, right? And saying that Jewish people couldn't assimilate into that national identity. And I don't know if they can't do it, but collectively there may be this idea of needing a Jewish state and all of that stuff. And that is our identity, and which I can understand, but I think that just gives me more information to better understand this issue. And then it also talked about where the word anti-Semite came from. I can't recall everything that was said in the documentary, but they were basically explaining those 2 concepts and saying that anti-Semite is kind of like a modern invention, a modern creation to explain whatever, right? And so, because how I think of anti-Semitism, I think of people who are targeting Jews, who hate Jewish people because of their race and religion, because Judaism or being Jewish is considered a race as well. Alrighty, so that is everything that I wanted to cover. We went over a lot of different topics. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.